They called her cold. They said she was distant, unsupportive, maybe even the reason her husband was falling apart. For years, strangers tore apart a woman they'd never met, creating stories about a marriage they knew nothing about. And through it all, Andrea Hampton said nothing. But silence doesn't mean what most people think it means. And when she finally sat down at her kitchen table, turned on her phone camera, and spoke for the first time, her words didn't just defend her name. They changed thousands of lives. This is her story, and it's going to challenge everything you believe about strength, faith, and what it really means to stand by someone when the whole world is watching. For over 2 decades, Wes Hampton's voice filled arenas and churches worldwide. As a member of the legendary Gaither Vocal Band, his performances brought people to tears and spread the gospel to millions. But while Wes stood under those lights, Andrea was at home raising their children, managing their household, praying over their family, and carrying the weight of being married to someone the world felt they owned. Here's what most don't understand. You become public property without signing up for it. People feel entitled to your life, your decisions, your marriage, and when you don't give them access, they create their own version of who you are. That's exactly what happened to Andrea. She chose not to be in the spotlight. No social media posts, no concert appearances, no interviews about her faith. And in today's world, that privacy is suspicious. If you're not posting, people assume something's wrong. Andrea's silence, which was wisdom and self-preservation, became fuel for speculation. Where is Andrea? Why isn't she on Instagram like other ministry wives? When people don't get answers, they create them. These weren't casual conversations. Full-blown rumors spread through Christian communities and online forums. Some assumed Andrea was unsupportive. Others whispered she was controlling. A few suggested she was why Wes seemed tired during performances. None of it was true. Andrea never defended herself. She believed God knew her heart and that the people who mattered knew the truth. But the rumors kept growing. Then came the breaking point. A Christian blog claimed Wes canceled a concert due to marital tension. They didn't name Andrea, but everyone knew. The comments exploded. Hundreds of strangers tore her apart, questioned her faith, accused her of being selfish. Some sent messages ranging from fake concern to cruelty. Imagine spending decades supporting your husband's ministry, raising your children, holding your family together, and suddenly, you're the villain. People who've never walked in your shoes are judging your character, spreading lies, and it's everywhere. That night, Andrea sat alone, scrolling through messages. Some concerned, many cruel, a few kind but heavy with misunderstanding. Something shifted. This wasn't just about her. This was about every woman misunderstood for choosing privacy over performance. Every ministry wife who felt invisible. Every mother who sacrificed in silence. Andrea realized her silence had left room for lies to flourish. Sometimes speaking truth isn't about defending yourself. It's about freeing others. So she prayed for the right words and timing. When peace came, she sat at her kitchen table and pressed record. No professional crew, no makeup, no script, no fancy lighting. Just Andrea speaking from raw, honest faith. And what she said changed everything. She acknowledged it all. Yes, she'd been silent. Yes, her marriage had gone through incredibly difficult seasons. But what stopped people in their tracks was how she owned her story without shame. She didn't pretend perfection or offer religious platitudes. She told the truth. Being married to someone in ministry is beautiful but brutally hard. The constant travel, emotional demands, and pressure take a toll. There were moments when she and Wes felt more like roommates than partners. Times when ministry left no energy for their marriage. Moments when they wondered if they could keep going. And here's what resonated. They had considered giving up, not because they didn't love each other, but because they were exhausted. They'd given everything to everyone else. But instead of walking away, they fought for their marriage. not just their ministry. They sought counseling, prayed together, and stepped back from events because their family was crumbling under public expectations. Then, Andrea said what became the most quoted line. She looked into the camera. "Prayer is more important than performance. God cares more about the state of our hearts than the sound of our voices on stage." That sentence captured everything. A rebuke to Christian celebrity culture demanding perfection while offering no grace, an invitation to prioritize what matters, a declaration that she'd no longer live by other people's expectations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, her video had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from all over the world. But these weren't hateful comments. These were messages of gratitude. Women who had been silently struggling in their own marriages reached out to say thank you. Ministry couples admitted they were on the brink of burnout, and Andrea's honesty gave them permission to ask for help. Even some of the people who had judged her harshly came back with apologies, admitting they had made assumptions without knowing the full story. And here's what's beautiful. Andrea didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply responded with grace, thanking people for their support and encouraging others to speak their truth when God gives them peace to do so. Wes's response was equally powerful. He shared her video with just one sentence. "She has always been my strength. I'm proud of her." No long explanation, no defense, just a simple acknowledgement of the woman who had held him up when the world only saw him standing strong. But the story doesn't end with that video, because what happened next is where this becomes a true legacy. Andrea and Wes realized that their season of struggle hadn't been wasted. It had actually prepared them for something bigger. They started noticing how many other ministry couples were silently suffering, trapped in the same cycle of people-pleasing and burnout that had almost destroyed their own marriage. So, they made a decision. They reduced their public ministry not because they were quitting, but because they were redirecting their calling. They began organizing private retreats specifically for couples in ministry, creating safe spaces where pastors, worship leaders, missionaries, and their spouses could come and just be human. No cameras, no expectations, just real conversation, prayer, counseling, and healing. And what they discovered was staggering. Nearly every couple they met was dealing with some version of what they had experienced: the pressure to be perfect, the loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people, the exhaustion of giving to everyone else while your own marriage slowly starves, the fear of being judged if you admit you're struggling. At one retreat, a pastor's wife broke down crying, admitting she hadn't told anyone her marriage was falling apart. She felt she had to maintain the perfect image. Andrea held her hand. "Your silence is protecting an image, but it's destroying your life. And the image isn't even real. It's what others created for you. The only opinion that matters is God's, and He already knows. So stop pretending for people who don't love you enough to handle your honesty." That moment became the heartbeat of their ministry. Andrea and Wes weren't just saving marriages. They were giving permission to be imperfect, to struggle, to prioritize relationship over reputation. Now, let me tell you why this matters right now. We're living in the most performative era that's ever existed. Social media has turned everyone's life into a highlight reel. And nowhere is this more damaging than in Christian circles. Ministry families are expected to be walking testimonies of perfect faith, marriage, parenting, and service. But that's not real or sustainable, and it's destroying people. The suicide rate among pastors is alarming. The divorce rate among ministry couples matches or exceeds the general population. The number leaving ministry due to burnout is skyrocketing. Why? Because we've created a culture that worships performance and ignores the person. We celebrate the song but forget the singer. We praise the sermon but neglect the soul who delivered it. We expect ministry families to give everything while offering little support in return. Andrea's story exposes this broken system. Her silence wasn't the problem. The problem was a culture that demanded constant visibility and mistook privacy for pride. The problem was a community that felt entitled to judge someone they didn't know. The problem was a system that placed more value on public perception than private wellness. And when Andrea finally spoke, she didn't just defend herself. She called out the whole system. She challenged the assumption that ministry families owe the public access to their private lives. She questioned the idea that being in ministry means forfeiting your right to boundaries, rest, and healing. And she reminded everyone that before Wes Hampton was a singer and before she was a ministry wife, they were human beings loved by God, deserving of dignity and grace. Here's what I find most powerful about Andrea's approach. She never became bitter. She had every right to be angry at the people who judged her, at the bloggers who spread rumors, at the so-called Christians who sent her hateful messages. But she chose differently. She chose grace over grudges. She chose forgiveness over fury. And in doing so, she demonstrated the very gospel she had been accused of not living up to. Because isn't that what Jesus taught? To love those who persecute you, to bless those who curse you, to respond to evil with good. Andrea lived that out in the most public and painful way possible. And her grace didn't just silence her critics, it transformed them. Many of the people who had judged her became some of the most vocal supporters of her and Wes's retreat ministry. Some even volunteered to help organize events or donated to support other struggling couples. There's a psychological principle at play here that's worth understanding. It's called the fundamental attribution error. Essentially, it means we judge others based on their actions, while judging ourselves based on our intentions. When Andrea wasn't visible, people judged her actions and assumed the worst. They didn't consider her intentions, her reasons, her struggles, or her humanity. But when she finally shared her story, she gave context to her actions. She revealed her intentions. And suddenly, people saw her differently. This is why storytelling is so powerful. It forces us to see the humanity in people we've reduced to stereotypes or assumptions. It challenges us to consider that maybe, just maybe, we don't know the whole story. And it invites us into empathy instead of judgment. Andrea's story is a masterclass in this. By vulnerably sharing her truth, she didn't just change how people saw her, she changed how people see everyone who chooses silence, privacy, or a different path than what's expected. Let's talk about the practical impact, because this is where it gets even more inspiring. Their retreats aren't just feel-good weekends, they're saving marriages and ministries. One couple attending was on the verge of divorce. The husband, a worship leader, had been caught in an emotional affair. They came as a last-ditch effort, expecting to file papers afterward. But over that weekend, hearing Andrea and Wes's story, participating in counseling, and connecting with other struggling couples, something shifted. They realized they weren't alone. They learned tools for communication, boundaries, and rebuilding trust. Most importantly, they remembered why they fell in love. 6 months later, they sent a video message. Not only were they still together, they were thriving. They'd implemented new boundaries, prioritized date nights, and were in ongoing counseling. They credited the retreat with giving them hope when they had none. That's just one story among dozens. Andrea keeps a journal of every couple they've worked with, not to boast, but to remember. On hard days when she questions whether stepping back from public ministry was the right choice, she reads through those stories. She's reminded that their willingness to be vulnerable about their own struggles created space for others to heal. And that, she says, is worth more than any applause from a concert crowd. This is the legacy she's building. Not one measured in album sales or social media followers, but in restored marriages, healed hearts, and transformed lives. It's a quiet legacy, much like her life has been, but it's a powerful one. Because the couples they help go on to help others. The healing ripples outward, creating waves of change in churches and communities around the world. Now I want to address something that some of you might be thinking. Is Andrea's story only relevant to ministry wives or people in the public eye? Absolutely not. The themes of her story are universal. How many of you have been misunderstood because you chose not to explain yourself to everyone? How many of you have been judged by people who knew nothing about your real struggles? How many of you have sacrificed in silence, only to be blamed when things didn't go according to someone else's expectations? Andrea's story is for the single mom working 2 jobs, who gets criticized for not attending every school event. It's for the caregiver who's exhausted from looking after aging parents, but gets judged for not doing enough. It's for the person dealing with mental health struggles who chooses not to broadcast their pain on social media and then gets accused of being distant or cold. It's for anyone who has ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or unfairly judged. Here's the deeper truth Andrea's story reveals. Our culture has a problem with people who don't perform their lives for public consumption. We've become so accustomed to oversharing that we distrust those who maintain boundaries. We mistake privacy for secrecy and quietness for weakness. But Andrea proves otherwise. Her quiet wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Her privacy wasn't secrecy, it was self-preservation. And her eventual decision to speak wasn't about vindication. It was about liberation, both for herself and for others trapped in similar situations. This is the shift we need in our culture. We need to stop demanding that people prove their worth through constant visibility. We need to give people grace for choosing paths we don't understand. And we need to remember that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about. There's something else I want you to understand about Andrea's journey. The power of choosing the right moment to speak. She could have responded immediately when the rumors first started. She could have gone on the defensive, corrected every false narrative, and fought back against her critics. But she didn't. She waited. She prayed. She processed. And when she finally spoke, it was from a place of peace, not pain, from wisdom, not woundedness. And that made all the difference. When you speak from a place of hurt, your words carry that energy. They can come across as defensive, bitter, or vindictive, even if that's not your intention. But when you take the time to heal first, to process your emotions and seek God's guidance, your words carry a completely different weight. They carry authority, they carry grace, they carry transformation. That's what happened with Andrea. By the time she recorded that kitchen table video, she wasn't angry anymore. She was clear. She wasn't defending herself. She was speaking truth, and people could feel the difference. This is a lesson we all can learn. In our age of instant reactions, there's incredible power in the pause. When someone hurts you, you don't have to respond immediately. When you're misunderstood, you don't have to explain yourself right away. When criticized unfairly, you don't have to defend yourself in that moment. Sometimes the wisest thing is to wait, pray, heal. When the time is right, when peace replaces pain, then speak. Your words will carry 10 times the impact. Andrea understood this instinctively. Her patience, her willingness to wait for God's timing rather than react in her own strength, is one of the most underrated parts of her story. Let me bring this full circle. We're living in a time of unprecedented noise. Everyone has a platform and an opinion. Everyone feels entitled to share it, whether they have the full story or not. In this environment, people like Andrea who choose silence, who value privacy, who refuse to perform their lives for public approval, they're revolutionary, they're countercultural, and they're desperately needed. Because for every person speaking, there are 10 more suffering in silence, terrified of being judged if they admit they're struggling. Andrea's willingness to break her silence, not to defend herself, but to give others permission to be human, created a seismic shift. She proved you don't need a platform to make an impact. Just honesty. You don't need to be perfect to help others, just real. And you don't need it all figured out to encourage someone. Just be willing to say, "I've been there too, and you're not alone." This is the legacy Andrea Hampton is building. It's not loud or flashy. It won't trend on social media or win awards, but it's changing lives. saving marriages, restoring faith. And it's reminding us that the most sacred work often happens behind the scenes, in living rooms and around kitchen tables, in quiet conversations and whispered prayers. So, if you're someone who feels unseen, someone who works quietly in the background, someone misunderstood or judged for not being loud enough, visible enough, or perfect enough, hear this. Your story matters. Your faithfulness matters. Your quiet strength is not wasted. There will come a moment when you're called to speak. When that moment arrives, don't be afraid. Speak your truth with grace. Share your story with humility. Trust that your voice, though soft, will be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truth, and when grace meets honesty, lives are forever changed.
If Andrea's story touched your heart today, I want you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now because it tells me these real, raw stories matter to you. Then subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that could change your perspective. But here's what I really want you to do. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend who's been misunderstood, a family member carrying a burden in silence, or a ministry couple you know who's struggling behind closed doors. Your share could be the lifeline someone desperately needs. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been judged for choosing silence? Have you ever felt invisible for not performing your life online? I read every single comment and I want to hear your story. And if you're going through something similar to what Andrea faced, know